Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Sarah sat at the far end, elbows resting on scratched metal, eyes sweeping the circle of men who spoke in clipped whispers and exchanged glances like lightning. They weren't ignoring her out of disrespect. She knew that. They were focused. In the next 48 hours, they might all be dead. And yet, the silence pressed against her like a verdict. She was a medic, not one of them, not really. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's voice cut through the tension. "We move at 200, in and out before dawn." His tone was gravel wrapped in ice, and his piercing blue eyes never stopped scanning, as if even the walls could betray them. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her trauma kit, every snap and buckle checked twice already. Bandages, IV fluids, clotting agents, morphine. She had saved over 200 lives with these tools. They were the language of her hands. She knew their weight the way others knew prayer. But tonight her hands trembled. The target was a Taliban commander who had orchestrated bombings that left children without fathers, villages without laughter. He was rumored to be hiding in a cluster of mud-brick homes wedged between two Afghan mountain peaks. The plan was simple on paper: surround, capture, extract. Nothing about it would be simple. Sullivan wrapped up the briefing with a nod. The men stood, chairs scraping concrete, their movements precise and practiced. They moved like a single organism, 6 of them, each scarred in a different way, each carrying the weight of too many missions. Mike Rodriguez, the comms expert, who kept a photo of his infant daughter tucked inside his vest. Tom Anderson, demolitions, steady hands and dry humor. Danny Kim, the young scout with hawk eyes and restless energy. Carlos Santos, the urban warfare specialist, always laughing until he was. David Thompson, the sniper, quiet, unreadable, and deadly. And her, the outlier, the healer. Santos caught her eye as he passed and winked. A small thing, but it cut through her doubt like sunlight through fog. Outside, the Afghan night was bone-cold and brittle. Stars burned hard against the black sky as the team checked gear in silence. Sarah adjusted the straps on her pack, the weight pulling at her shoulders like an old friend. She had carried the same burden through 3 tours, and still, tonight felt different. Maybe it was because of Thompson. Weeks ago, during pre-deployment training, he had cornered her in the armory. "Doc," he had said, lifting a sleek black rifle from a case she'd never seen before. "Let me show you something." She'd laughed, unsure if he was joking. "I'm a medic, Chief. I save lives." "Sometimes," Thompson said, voice soft as sand. "Saving lives means being ready to do whatever it takes." He had taught her quietly before dawn when the others slept. She had learned to slow her breathing, to feel the rhythm of her pulse through the rifle stock, to squeeze the trigger with the same care she used when sliding an IV into a vein. It had felt like blasphemy. Healing and killing were supposed to be opposites. But Thompson had made it sound like they were cousins. Now, hours from combat, she pushed those memories aside. They weren't why she was here. She was here to keep her team alive, not to take life. Sullivan signaled with 2 fingers, time to move. They slipped into the mountains like ghosts, boots crunching faintly over broken stone. The air was thin and sharp, each breath scraping her lungs. Her heartbeat settled into the rhythm of the march. Sarah had been in Afghanistan long enough to recognize the beauty that hid its danger. The ridges glowed gold in the moonlight, jagged teeth rising from the earth. Wind whispered through narrow passes, carrying smells of smoke and earth. Somewhere below, villagers slept, unaware that war would pass through their lives before sunrise. Kim ranged ahead, barely more than a shadow. Rodriguez muttered into his radio, voice low and steady. Santos cracked a quiet joke to no one in particular, earning a half-smile from Anderson. And Thompson moved like gravity had less hold on him. They reached the final ridge just as the first hint of dawn touched the peaks. The village crouched below them, small and ancient, smoke curling from a few chimneys. It looked peaceful, It looked like every other place Sarah had ever patched holes in broken people. Her stomach tightened. Peaceful never lasted here. Sullivan raised his fist. Halt. The men froze, breathing shallow, waiting for his hand signals. Sarah crouched behind a rock, her pack digging into her spine. Sullivan traced invisible lines in the air, flanking routes, timing approach angles. They had practiced this in the sand table for hours. Now it was real. Sarah checked her radio, checked her med kit again. A ritual, a way to push the fear into neat compartments where it couldn't paralyze her. Her hands were steady, her heart was not. They descended into the village as the sun began to rise. Time slowed. Every corner could hide a rifle. Every doorway could conceal an ambush. Sarah's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, scanning for movement, for the flicker of danger. They reached the target house without incident. It was almost disappointing. Sullivan signaled, three-pronged entry, quick, quiet. The team flowed like water. Anderson on point, Santos on his flank, Kim covering the rear. Thompson disappeared to a rooftop overwatch. Rodriguez set up comms near a wall. Sarah took her place by the door, pulse hammering. Sullivan mouthed, "Go." The door burst inward. The team flooded inside with surgical violence. Shouts, a scuffle, boots on stone. Within seconds the target was pinned, zip-tied, gagged, alive. "To Ezzy." Sarah's gut screamed. She was kneeling to check the man's vitals when a sound cracked the air behind her. A single shot, sharp and close, then another, then dozens. The world shattered. Bullets tore into the courtyard walls. Muzzle flashes flared from surrounding rooftops like fireflies made of death. Dust exploded upward as rounds chewed the ground around them. "Contact, contact," Rodriguez shouted. Sarah flinched, heart slamming against her ribs. The peaceful village dissolved in a heartbeat. Kim went down first. A scream cut short, blood blossoming across his shoulder. Anderson yelled something. Santos was already firing back, teeth bared in a snarl. Sullivan grabbed the target, dragging him toward cover, shouting orders over the roar of gunfire. Sarah dropped to Kim's side, instincts overriding terror. The smell of blood hit her, copper and heat. "You're okay, Danny. Stay with me," she whispered, even as bullets screamed overhead. Her hands moved fast, precise. Gauze, pressure, tourniquet. Her training carved out a bubble of calm around her, a thin shield against the chaos. "Doc Santos is hit too." Thompson's voice cut through the comms, cool even under fire. Sarah's eyes flicked up. Santos lay against a wall, clutching his leg. Kim was stable enough for now. She sprinted low across open ground, feeling each shot crack the air around her, the world narrowing to seconds and heartbeats. She slid beside Santos. Blood soaked his pants, muscle torn but bone intact. "How bad?" he hissed. "You'll live," she said. Her voice sounded calm. She was. Gunfire ripped the air. Muzzle flashes winked from windows, from doorways, from the high tower at the edge of the village. The tower. Sarah saw the glint of a scope. Her breath caught. A sniper elevated, patient, waiting. And killing them one by one. Sullivan barked orders, voice fraying at the edges. "We're pinned. Thompson, I need that sniper down now." Thompson's reply was tight, angry. "I can't get a clear shot. He ducks every time I sight him. He's got us zeroed from that minaret." Sarah followed his gaze. The tower loomed above the rooftops, sunlight catching on the stone. She saw a flicker of movement there, then gone. Her skin went cold. If that sniper stayed alive, none of them were getting out. Kim bleeding, Santos barely mobile, ammo low, air support too risky this close to civilians. They were trapped. Sarah pressed her back against the wall, the chaos roaring in her ears. She could feel Thompson's frustration radiating from the other side of the courtyard. And then something inside her shifted. Quiet, cold. the memory of pre-dawn mornings on the range, Thompson's voice in her ear. Breath in, breath out, natural pause, then squeeze. Her gaze locked on Thompson. "Chief," she said, voice steady in a way that frightened her. "I need the backup rifle." The world seemed to stop. Thompson froze mid-reload, eyes narrowing like he wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "Say that again, Doc." "I need the rifle," she said, and this time her voice didn't shake. Gunfire cracked overhead, a sharp punctuation. The courtyard reeked of gunpowder and blood. Somewhere behind them, Kim groaned, slipping toward shock. Santos clenched his teeth to stay conscious. Sullivan was pressed behind an overturned cart, shouting into his radio, trying to conjure extraction out of thin air. Thompson stared at her for one long second, the chaos around them suspended in that silence. Then he gave a short nod. "Okay." He swung his pack off, hands moving fast and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was low, calm, the way it had been on those early mornings on the range. "Remember what I told you. Breathing is everything. Natural pause, don't fight the recoil. Let it happen." Sarah's fingers trembled as they closed on the rifle's cool metal. It was beautiful, impossibly so in this ruin of stone and dust. The scope gleamed like glass cut from frozen stars. She set the bipod against the low wall, muscle memory guiding her movements. Around her, the world raged. Inside her, it went still. "Range Fort Wentty," Thompson murmured, eyes scanning. "Wind negligible. Elevation drop 3 inches. He's good, Doc, but not perfect. He's falling into a pattern. 15 seconds between shots. Always exposes his left shoulder first." Sarah slid behind the scope. The tower leapt into view, crisp and unreal. Stone arches, shadowed balcony, and there, just a flicker movement behind the balustrade, gone again. Her heart pounded, each beat hammering her ribs. She forced her breathing to slow. In, out. Natural pause. The courtyard noise blurred. Santos gritting pain, Anderson's rifle cracking, Sullivan barking positions. None of it reached her. Only the scope. Only the tower. Only the moment. She caught herself thinking of anatomy, not targets, not kills, anatomy, the way her brain always did. The shoulder would present first, vital arteries tucked just beneath. The skull fragile at the temple. And then another thought slid in uninvited. He's probably someone's son. Her breath faltered. She saw Kim's pale face, eyes fluttering. Santos's leg bleeding through bandages. Rodriguez crouched low, a photo of his daughter taped inside his comms case. And she saw the man in the tower, calm, patient, waiting to take all of them from the world. Her hands stilled. Thompson's voice reached her like a lifeline. "Doc, I know what's in your head. Don't give it words right now. There's time to feel it later, not now." She nodded once, eyes never leaving the scope. The sniper reappeared, just a shadow, shoulder and scope flashing in the sun. 15 seconds. In, out. Pause. Her heartbeat slowed, became a metronome. She squeezed. The rifle kicked, a soft, perfect crack. Through the glass she saw him jerk backward, rifle spinning from his hands, his body folding behind the stone like a marionette with cut strings. Silence. Then the battlefield roared back to life. "Sniper down," Thompson shouted. A crackle of energy rippled through the team. Sullivan surged from cover, firing controlled bursts. Anderson shifted to a flanking position. Santos whooped through gritted teeth, his leg still bleeding but his spirit somehow untouched. The rhythm changed. Sarah barely heard any of it. Her finger hovered over the trigger, but there was no target anymore. Just an empty balcony framed by morning light. Her chest felt hollow, weightless. Thompson's hand touched her shoulder, steady, grounding. Clean shot, textbook perfect. The words didn't fit inside her. She lowered the rifle, and her hands began to shake. Across the courtyard, Kim stirred. "Doc," he whispered, voice small and fragile. That one word, Doc, snapped her back. She slid from behind the rifle like waking from a dream. In seconds, she was kneeling at Kim's side, checking his pulse, adjusting his bandage, her voice calm again. "You're okay, Danny, you're okay." Her hands knew what to do. They always had. She didn't look at the tower, not once. Minutes blurred. Rodriguez finally got through to command. The extraction helicopter was inbound, 10 minutes out. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. The remaining Taliban fighters were still scattered in the surrounding buildings, but without their overwatch, their attack had lost its teeth. Their fire slackened, sporadic, panicked. Sullivan coordinated the team's withdrawal with clipped commands, pushing them toward the designated landing zone. Sarah and Anderson hauled Kim together. Santos limped with Rodriguez's shoulder under his arm. Thompson brought up the rear, his sniper rifle back in his hands, eyes scanning every rooftop like a sentinel. The chopper's rotor thump reached them before they saw it, a deep, beating heart in the sky. Dust and grit blasted the air as it descended. Sullivan waved them forward. "Move, move." They scrambled into the bay as the bird touched down. Med gear clattered. Spent magazines rattled on the floor. The helicopter lifted, pulling them up and away from the wreckage of the village. Only then did Sarah let herself collapse into her seat, head bowed, hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. Her body was shaking again, not from fear, not from adrenaline, from something deeper. Thompson sat across from her, strapped in, face unreadable. But when their eyes met, he gave the smallest nod. Not pride, not congratulations, just understanding. She had crossed the line. The med bay was chaos when they landed. Sarah moved through it like a ghost, guiding stretchers, shouting vitals, handing off patients to other medics. Her voice stayed steady. Her hands never faltered. She sutured Santos's torn muscle. She set Kim's IV, stabilized his blood pressure, ordered fluids. She cleaned their blood off her skin like scrubbing away dreams. Only when both men were stable, drifting in morphine sleep, did she walk out into the night. The bass hummed around her, engines, boots on gravel, distant laughter. It all felt too normal. She wandered until she found herself in the chapel. It was empty, dim, and still. She sat in the last pew and stared at the plain wooden cross at the front, though she had never been religious. The silence pressed close. Her shot replayed behind her eyes in perfect clarity. One breath, one squeeze, one life gone. The thought hollowed her. The door creaked. "I heard what happened." Chaplain Williams's voice was soft, lined with age and too many nights like this. He eased onto the bench beside her, clasping his hands. Sarah stared forward. "I was supposed to heal. That's who I am. That's all I've ever been." "You saved your team," he said gently. "I killed someone." "Sometimes," the chaplain said, "saving and killing are part of the same moment. Doesn't make it easy, doesn't make it clean, but it makes it necessary." She swallowed hard. "How do I live with it?" "You don't live with what you did," he said. "You live with why you did it." They sat in silence for a long time. And for the first time that day, Sarah let herself cry. Later, in the dim light of the team quarters, the SEALs gathered, their post-mission ritual. Coffee, quiet voices, no rank, no ceremony. Sullivan looked at her across the table. 15 years I've been doing this," he said. "I've seen men freeze, men break, men do impossible things. What you did out there was beyond all of it. Not just the shot, the choice." Rodriguez raised his cup in salute. "My daughter's going to grow up because of you." Anderson smirked. "To the doc who saves lives one way or another." They laughed, soft and tired. Sarah smiled faintly, but inside she felt the crack where her old self had been. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She wasn't sure what she was. That night she lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the shot, the way the enemy sniper had crumpled, the sudden silence. And for the first time, she wondered if the part of her that had pulled the trigger was gone, or if it was waiting for her now, silent and patient, like a shadow she could never unsee. 3 weeks later, she stood at attention in front of a desk buried in after-action reports, sunlight slicing through the blinds in clean, sharp lines. Colonel Harrison didn't look up right away. The silence stretched, taut and thin. Sarah's shoulders ached from holding perfect posture. Her uniform felt heavy, stiffer than body armor. She had faced gunfire without blinking. This, somehow, was worse. "Dr. Martinez," the colonel said finally, his voice clipped and precise, forged by decades of command. "I've reviewed the statements from Lieutenant Commander Sullivan and his team." His eyes lifted, steady and sharp. "What you accomplish goes far beyond standard medical duties." Her jaw locked, she said nothing. This wasn't a conversation, it was a verdict. The elimination of the enemy sniper allowed the team to break contact and extract with minimal casualties, Harrison continued. Your transition from medic to sniper, accomplished in seconds under extreme pressure, demonstrated exceptional adaptability and tactical awareness. The words fell like stones into a deep well. Transition, adaptability, tactical awareness. He was describing a transformation she still didn't understand. Inside, she felt raw, like her skin didn't fit. Harrison's tone shifted, lower, weighted. "This raises questions about your future role within Special Operations Command." And there it was. Sarah didn't move, but her heart lurched. "You possess a unique combination of skills," Harrison said. "Marksmanship capability, medical expertise. This is unusual and valuable." Valuable. The word made her stomach twist. Because what he meant was lethal. She had expected this moment. The rumors had reached her long before this summons. The medic who had taken an impossible shot. The woman who crossed the line and didn't flinch. They said it like it was a story, like it had been easy. They hadn't seen her crying in the chapel. They hadn't seen the way her hands shook the first time she picked up a scalpel again. Thompson had warned her this might come. "They'll want to use you," he'd said quietly, one evening on the range. "Rare skills get noticed. The question is whether you're ready to live with what that means." Now here it was. Harrison's gaze was steady, unblinking, waiting. Sarah felt the weight of two futures pressing down on her chest. She could return to who she had been, a combat medic who patched holes, who fought death but never dealt it. Pretend that day in the village had been an aberration, a glitch. Or she could acknowledge the truth she didn't want to name. That the line between healer and killer had blurred, and she was standing on it. "Sir," she said, her voice even though her heart felt like glass, "I believe I can serve more effectively by integrating both skill sets." Harrison didn't blink. "My medical training gives me a deep understanding of human anatomy and physiology," she continued. "That enhances my marksmanship, and my sniper training has made me more tactically aware as a medic. They make each other stronger." A silence. Then slowly he nodded. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say." He leaned back, folding his hands. "We're creating a new position for you. You'll remain a primary medic for special operations teams, but also serve as a designated marksman when required." It was done just like that. Signed into existence with the ease of someone shifting pieces on a board. Sarah stood rigid, but inside she felt like she was free-falling. "Dismissed," Harrison said. She saluted, turned, walked out. Her legs felt like stone. Over the following months, Sarah's world changed. She deployed on missions that blurred the boundaries of who she was. On a hostage rescue in Syria, she spent 4 hours performing emergency surgery on a wounded civilian while simultaneously providing overwatch from a rooftop. Her hands stitched torn flesh between trigger pulls, her voice calm over the radio as she called out enemy positions. In Somalia, she guided her team through a maze of canyons, reading the terrain through a sniper's eyes, anticipating ambushes that never happened because she saw them first. She moved between roles like water, sometimes healer, sometimes hunter, sometimes both in the same breath. Each mission carved new lines into her, lines she didn't know how to erase. Some nights she sat awake in the med bay after everyone else had gone, scrubbing her hands raw under cold water, staring at the pink rinse spiraling down the drain, trying to wash off the contradiction. But it clung to her. Thompson remained her quiet anchor. He still trained with her, still offered the same patient corrections. You're pulling left on your exhale. Watch your trigger reset. Stay loose. But their conversations had changed. They spoke less about technique now, more about the weight. The hardest part isn't shooting, Thompson said one evening, sitting beside her on a crate, watching the sun bleed out over the desert. It's staying human while you do it. Sarah stared at the horizon, and if you stop feeling human, then you stop being useful, he said simply. It wasn't comfort, it was truth. Gradually, the teams began to see her differently. At first they whispered, the medic who killed a sniper, but whispers turned to respect. She wasn't just a medic with a good shot, or a sniper with a medical license. She was something new. They started calling her the Guardian, half joking, half not. On missions, they trusted her to cover their backs and their wounds. They handed her the radio and the responsibility without hesitation. And somewhere in that, she began to trust herself again. Still, the nights were hardest. Some nights she woke gasping. The tower burned into her vision, the man's body folding and vanishing behind the stone. Other nights she dreamed of her first tour, of holding a boy barely old enough to shave as his life bled out between her fingers. Her mind would try to reconcile them, the girl she had been, the woman she was now. It never quite fit. One night after a long mission, she wandered back to the chapel. It was empty as always. The same plain wooden cross, the same quiet. Chaplain Williams was there, polishing the brass candlesticks. Back again, he said softly. Sarah sat in the back pew, staring at the cross. I thought it would get easier. It doesn't, the chaplain said, not looking at her. It just gets clearer. She swallowed. Am I still who I was? That depends, he said. Are you still doing this to protect people? Yes. Then yes, you are. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Months blurred into more missions. More lives saved. And more taken. Sarah kept count of the first number. She tried not to count the second. She volunteered in the base clinic on her downtime, treating sprains, infections, fevers. The small, human work anchored her. It reminded her of who she had been, of why she had chosen this path in the first place. She started developing new techniques, merging medical and tactical knowledge, teaching other medics how to stay alive under fire, how to keep their hands steady on both the scalpel and the trigger. Her method spread quietly through the special operations community. Other medics picked them up. Teams started surviving longer, bleeding less. Recognition came in waves, commendations, letters from commanders, handshakes from generals. But the only approval that mattered came from the teams she served with. When they called her name over the radio, when they said "Doc" on it, and the fear bled out of their voices, that was her measure of worth. One night, sitting alone in the mess hall long after lights out, Thompson joined her. You know, he said, sliding into the chair opposite, they're going to build something out of this. She blinked at him. This thing you've become, he said. They're going to want more of you, a whole program maybe, train others like you. Sarah stared into her coffee. I'm not sure that's a good thing. Maybe not, Thompson said, but it might be necessary. She thought about that for a long time after he left, because part of her knew he was right. What she had become was dangerous. But maybe, so was a world where no one else could carry the same burden. The girl who had gone into that village to save lives had not returned. In her place was someone who could do both. And for the first time, Sarah wondered if that might be her purpose. Not to choose between healing and harming, but to prove they could serve the same end. They started watching her. At first it was subtle, glances during mission briefings, her name whispered just loud enough to hear. The team she deployed with eyed her the way soldiers watch storm fronts, part awe, part fear, part hope. Word had spread fast through the tight veins of the special operations community. The medic who had become a sniper, the one who could heal you and kill the thing trying to kill you in the same breath. She hated the myth of it. Because the myth sounded clean, it was. It was blood and screams and a quiet voice inside her that she still couldn't silence. But Command loved the myth. And Command was watching too. The moment it became official came in the form of a sealed envelope on her bunk. Orders. Report to Joint Operations Command at 700. The hallway outside the office felt colder than the Afghan nights she'd left behind. She stood rigid as the general spoke. "You've demonstrated capabilities we haven't seen before," he said, eyes sharp behind wire-framed glasses. "The combination of advanced medical skills and precision marksmanship is rare and potentially transformative." Transformative. The word tasted like iron. "We want you to develop a pilot program," he continued. "Train a small cadre of combat medics in your integrated method, tactical awareness, trauma care, and long-range engagement." Sarah blinked. "Sir, you want to replicate this?" "Yes." "Sir, do you understand what it does to you?" He paused. "Do you?" Her breath caught. The truth was, she wasn't sure. They gave her 12 candidates. Volunteers. Each one a proven combat medic with at least 2 deployments, hand-picked for their resilience and adaptability. They arrived in dusty fatigues, still carrying the smell of the field. Wide-eyed, sharp-eyed, skeptical. Sarah stood in front of them on the first morning, the desert sun hard on her shoulders, and saw pieces of who she had once been in each face. "Welcome to Advanced Combat Medical Support," she said. "Unofficially, they're calling it Doc's dual-role training. You'll learn to save lives and take them sometimes in the same minute." No one spoke. "Some of you are natural shooters who need to learn empathy," she said. "Some of you are gifted healers who need to learn how to pull the trigger. Either way, this will break something in you." Still no one spoke. Then softly from the back, "Is it worth it?" Sarah met the young woman's eyes. Lisa Chen, former pediatric nurse, gentle face, posture like a drawn bow. Sarah thought about Kim's pale skin under her hands, about the sniper falling from the tower, about the chapel's silence. "Yes," she said, "if you remember why you're doing it." The days were brutal. Morning on the range. Afternoon in the trauma bay. Blood and brass side by side. Sarah drilled them relentlessly. Breathing control for precision shots. The same breathing to steady hands during emergency surgery. Situational awareness to avoid ambushes and to keep their patients from becoming casualties again. Thompson served as co-instructor, silent as ever. His presence calmed her more than she admitted. The students struggled. Some froze on the trigger. Others flinched at the sight of simulated blood. A few cried when they thought no one was looking. Sarah didn't blame them. She had cried too once. Late at night, after the students had gone, she stayed in the empty range. She would line up on the distant silhouette targets, hands steady, breath controlled, every shot perfect. And after each trigger squeeze, she would whisper under her breath, "I am still a healer." Like an incantation. as if saying it enough times could make it true. Critics began circling even before the first class graduated. Ethicists, psychologists, commanders from other branches. They came with questions sharpened like blades. Doesn't this blur the moral lines too far? Are you creating soldiers who won't know which instinct to follow? Can someone be both? Sarah answered carefully. This isn't about blurring lines, she said in interview after interview. It's about expanding them. It's about giving medics more tools to protect lives, not fewer rules, more responsibility. They nodded, they wrote their reports, they left unconvinced. Sarah didn't care if they were convinced. She only cared if her students stayed alive. The first graduating class deployed as a team. 3 months later, they came back. All of them. Alive. With stories of pulling wounded teammates from fire while returning fire themselves. Of holding pressure on ephemeral bleed with one hand while calling out enemy movement through a scope. Their commander sent her a handwritten note. Your people saved my people, thank you. She kept it folded in her pocket like a talisman. But success carried a strange loneliness. The more they celebrated her, the less she recognized herself. Commanders shook her hand like she was a prototype. New recruits looked at her like a legend. Even her old teammates spoke to her with a thin veil of reverence now. She missed being just the doc. She missed being invisible. One night she found herself back in the chapel. The same dim light, the same silence like folded cloth. Chaplain Williams sat beside her without asking. You're building something big, he said softly. It feels like I'm building a weapon, she said. Maybe, he paused, or maybe you're building a shield. She looked down at her hands, scarred from shrapnel and calloused from rifle grips. I don't know which anymore. Then teach them both, the chaplain said, and teach them when to be which. The next morning, she walked onto the range with new fire in her voice. Listen up, she called. The world doesn't need people who love shooting. It needs people who hate it and do it anyway because someone's life depends on it. Her words cut through the dry wind like steel. The students straightened. They understood. By the end of that cycle, something remarkable had happened. The dual-role medics weren't just shooting straighter and treating faster. They were calmer, more aware, more humane. Military psychologists ran assessments and found something none of them expected. Higher empathy, not lower. Sarah wasn't surprised. When you've held someone's life in your hands, she told the researchers, you think harder before you take one. Thompson found her on the catwalk above the range one evening, watching the trainees pack their gear. They're getting good, he said. They have to be better than good, she murmured. You know they will be, he said. She turned to him. Do you ever think about that day, the tower? Every day, he said. They stood in silence for a long time. When command came to her with new orders, expand the program, train Allied forces, Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the sharp, dangerous kind that blinds you. The quiet kind that hums under your ribs, fragile as glass. Because what she had become wasn't just hers anymore. It was becoming theirs. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked the quiet halls of the base, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, until she found herself outside the med bay. The door was half open. Inside, a young medic sat slumped in a chair, head in hands, blood drying on his scrubs. Sarah stepped inside silently. Bad day, she asked softly. He looked up, eyes red. He didn't make it. I tried everything. I know, she said. He shook his head. I don't know how to keep doing this. Sarah crouched in front of him, her voice low and steady. You keep going because the next one might make it, and because the people standing next to you need you too. He swallowed, nodded. When she walked out, she realized her hands weren't shaking. She had begun this journey as a medic who became a sniper. Now she was something else entirely. A bridge between two worlds that were never meant to touch. And yet because of her, they did. The morning sun rose over the training compound like a pale blade. Sarah watched from the balcony as 12 medics in dusty fatigues shouldered their rifles and moved downrange in perfect silence. Their boots struck the earth in unison, like a single heartbeat. They weren't her anymore, not yet, but they would be. And that thought scared her more than it comforted. The program had exploded. What began as 12 reluctant volunteers had become something larger, something with acronyms and funding, and eyes watching from every corner of the military. They called it Advanced Combat Medical Support now. Unofficially, they still called it Doc's dual role. Her name had been welded to it, whether she wanted it or not. The Pentagon had sent observers. NATO had sent liaisons. There were whispers that Allied forces wanted to copy the model. Sarah's inbox filled with commendations, invitations, even offers to brief Congress. None of it meant anything when she lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. Because while they were celebrating what she had built, she was still trying to decide if it should exist. Her students didn't see her doubts. To them, she was unshakable. They watched her every movement like disciples watching a prophet. The way she adjusted her stance behind a rifle, the way her hands moved like water over trauma kits, the way her voice never rose, never cracked. She could feel the weight of their belief pressing down on her shoulders every hour of every day. And she carried it because someone had to. Thompson stayed at her side as always. He had requested assignment to the program permanently, claiming this was the most important work he would ever do. He didn't smile much anymore, but then neither did she. Some nights they sat on the balcony in silence, watching the trainees drill in the moonlight, saying nothing at all. Other nights Thompson would speak quietly. "They're better than we were," he'd say, and she would nod without looking at him. Because it was true. The students weren't just learning to shoot and stitch. They were learning to think differently, to see the battlefield as a living organism, threats and wounds and human lives woven together, to weigh every decision like a surgeon, with a scalpel poised over a beating heart. Sarah drilled them on hesitation, when to pause, when to breathe, when not to fire. Anyone can pull a trigger, she told them. Not everyone can decide when not to. That line etched itself into their bones. But the cost of becoming symbols was showing in quiet ways. Chen, the gentle pediatric nurse turned crack shot, had started waking in the night screaming. Others flinched when loudspeakers blared drills. One student vomited after her first live-fire scenario, hands trembling as if she'd seen a ghost. Sarah recognized every symptom. Because they were hers too. She brought in psychologists, mandatory counseling sessions, journaling requirements. Critics called it soft. She called it survival. The military researcher swarmed in like vultures disguised as scientists. They ran batteries of tests on her students. Stress markers, cortisol levels, emotional resilience indices. The results astonished them. Her medics showed higher empathy than average combat personnel. They were more decisive, but also more emotionally grounded. Why? One researcher demanded. Sarah had smiled faintly, though it never reached her eyes. Because when you've held someone's life in your hands, you think twice before taking one. The researcher wrote it down like scripture. Then came Sullivan, her old team leader, the man who had once watched her kneel in the dirt and choose to cross the line. He strode across the compound with a grin she hadn't seen in years. "Orders for you, Doc," he said, handing her a sealed folder. "NATO wants you in Eastern Europe. They're standing up their own version of this." Sarah blinked. Allied forces. They wanted her to teach this to the world. For a long moment, she just stared at the folder. And then very softly she said, "God help us." That night she sat in the chapel again, the quiet place where all her roads seemed to lead. Chaplain Williams was there, polishing brass with slow, methodical movements. "I hear you're going global," he said gently. "Apparently," she said. "How does it feel?" "Like responsibility," she whispered. "Not just for the people I train, but for making sure they don't forget why they're doing it." The chaplain set down the cloth and looked at her. "That's always been the hardest part, keeping our humanity while we do what's necessary to protect it." She closed her eyes. "What if I can't?" "Then you teach them too," he said. The weeks before her departure blurred into relentless preparation. Briefings, logistics, endless paperwork. Between meetings, she walked the compound at dawn, watching her students drill, listening to their boots hit the dirt like distant drums. She thought of who she had been, kneeling in a dusty Afghan courtyard, hands red with blood, looking through a scope at the man in the tower. That single breath, that single shot. Everything had spiraled from that moment outward like shrapnel through her life. And somehow it had become this. On her last night before leaving for Europe, the students gathered in the mess hall. Someone had baked a lopsided cake. Someone else had hung a banner that just read "Thank you, Doc" in crooked black paint. They clapped when she walked in, and it startled her more than any ambush ever had. Chen stepped forward, holding something small wrapped in cloth. A silver scalpel. "Not a weapon," Chen said softly, "a reminder." Sarah's throat closed. She accepted it like it was made of glass. Afterward, long after they had gone to bed, she walked alone down the silent corridor to the medical wing. She pushed open the door to the empty trauma bay. The overhead lights buzzed softly. The air smelled of antiseptic and memory. She stood there a long time, staring at the empty gurneys, remembering the first time she'd held someone's life and felt it slipping away. She wondered how many lives she had saved since. She wondered how many she had taken. She wondered if there was a number where those scales would balance. She suspected there was. She left the trauma bay and stepped into the cold night air. The compound lay quiet beneath the stars, the same stars that had watched her crawl through the Afghan dust with a rifle in her hands. She tilted her head back and let the silence settle into her bones. And for just one fleeting moment, she let herself believe that maybe, she had done something good. The cold hit her first. Eastern Europe in winter was nothing like the Afghan mountains. No dry dust, no thin air that scraped her lungs. Just wet, bone-deep chill that soaked through her uniform no matter how tightly she cinched it. She stepped off the transport plane into a slate-gray dawn, breath fogging in the air. Rows of unfamiliar faces waited beyond the tarmac. NATO officers, translators, aides in crisp uniforms. They were here for her. She wished they were. The camp looked like every military camp she had ever seen, and nothing like any of them. Concrete and canvas, barbed wire and antennas, the smell of diesel and damp wool. But the eyes that followed her were different. Cautious, curious, measuring. She was Doc here, she was an experiment. The first briefing was chaos. A dozen different accents, half a dozen different uniforms, and all of them talking at once. The German commander wanted more emphasis on trauma medicine. The French liaison argued that sniping was culturally incompatible with their doctrine. A British major openly questioned the morality of it. Sarah stood at the head of the table, hands flat on the cold metal, listening as they debated what she was without looking at her. They spoke about her as if she were a weapon system, not a human being. Finally, she said, "This isn't about creating killers who can also bandage wounds." The room went still. "It's about creating protectors who are willing to do Whatever it takes to keep people alive. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through their noise like wire. Slowly, the arguing stopped. They gave her 40 candidates. Medics from across NATO. Some barely older than kids. Some with eyes as tired as hers. The first day, they stood lined up in the icy wind as she walked the line, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. "I'm not here to make you snipers," she told them. "I'm here to make you harder to kill and harder to break." She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "This will hurt," she said. "It will change you. If that scares you good, it should." No one moved. And so it began. The days blurred. Morning, marksmanship drills in the snow, breath pluming from their mouths like smoke. Afternoon, trauma lanes inside heated tents, gloves slick with synthetic blood, mannequins screaming recorded audio of battlefield chaos. They fumbled, they cursed, they broke down. And slowly they began to change. Sarah watched it happen the way you watch ice melt, invisible moment to moment, undeniable over time. They stopped seeing shooting and healing as opposite acts. They started seeing them as the same promise, spoken in different languages. But resistance lingered. Officers hovered like vultures at the edge of every exercise. Some worried she was creating soldiers who would burn out faster. Some feared she was creating soldiers who wouldn't burn out at all. Journalists requested access. Think tanks issued white papers with titles like "The Ethics of Dual-Role Combatants." She ignored them. Her students came first. But at night, alone in her quarters, the headlines crawled under her skin like frost. Was she building protectors or weapons? Was there even a difference anymore? One night, she found herself walking the perimeter, boots crunching in the frozen gravel. The sky was black glass, stars sharp as needles. Thompson fell into step beside her without a word. He had joined her in Europe, officially as a senior advisor, unofficially because he refused to let her carry this alone. For a long while they walked in silence, breath steaming. Then he said, "You're thinking too loud." She smiled faintly. "I'm thinking about what happens if we're wrong." "Then we fix it," he said. "What if we can't?" "Then we carry it." She didn't answer, because they both knew she already was. The first live-fire exercise came in the third week. Simulated ambush, full tactical gear, real rifles. Snow fell in slow spirals as the trainees moved through the mock village, boots whispering on the icy stone. When the gunfire erupted, half of them froze. The other half fired wildly. Sarah stood on the catwalk above, watching without expression. It wasn't about accuracy yet. It was about seeing who would break. Several did. One bolted from cover to reach a wounded comrade screaming, and took 3 paint rounds to the chest. Another stayed frozen in the open, whispering, "I can't," until Thompson pulled him out. Sarah said nothing. Later in the debrief, her voice was cold steel. "You didn't fail because you missed your shots. You failed because you forgot why you were here. If you run toward someone bleeding, you don't get to hesitate when someone tries to stop you." Her words cut deep. They were supposed to. Weeks passed. The trainees grew sharper, harder, and yet paradoxically gentler. They began staying late in the trauma tents, perfecting sutures long after their hands went numb. They checked on each other after drills, quietly sharing energy bars, adjusting gear straps. One night, Sarah walked past the dorms and heard someone softly playing a lullaby on guitar, the notes fragile as snowflakes. It broke something open in her chest, because it meant they still remembered why. But outside the wire, the world was circling like sharks. Think pieces, ethics boards, leaked training footage. The media began calling her the angel with a rifle. She hated it. It made her sound like a fable, like she hadn't cried in the chapel, like she didn't wake some nights tasting blood on her tongue that wasn't hers. They turned her into something polished, and it terrified her because she wasn't sure she could live up to what they thought she was, or survive becoming what they wanted her to be. On a rare Sunday, she returned to the camp chapel, a tiny prefab building with thin walls and a single flickering candle. The chaplain here was younger than her, nervous, new. "You're the famous one," he said awkwardly, offering her weak tea. "I'm the tired one," she said. He studied her. "Do you think what you're doing is right?" She stared into the steaming cup. "I think it's necessary," she said. "Right stopped being part of the equation a long time ago." The program ended its first cycle, with 32 of the original 40 graduating. They stood in the snow at parade rest, medals glinting on their chests, faces carved by wind and exhaustion. Sarah walked the line, eyes locking with each of theirs. They weren't kids anymore. They weren't her either. They were something new. And that realization both comforted and hollowed her. Because this was no longer just about her survival or her team. This was a doctrine now. A legacy. And it had teeth. That night, Thompson found her alone in the armory, disassembling her rifle in perfect silence. "They're ready," he said. "I know. You don't look happy about it." She set the bolt carrier down gently, like it might shatter. "I just keep thinking, what if this becomes all they are?" Thompson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then you teach them how not to be." The next morning, as the trainees shipped out to their units, she stood on the tarmac watching the trucks roll away into the gray snowlight. They waved as they disappeared. Sarah raised her hand in return, though her fingers felt like stone. Because she knew she had given them more than skills. She had given them a burden they didn't yet understand. The same burden she still carried every time she closed her eyes. The air smelled different when she came home. Not of diesel or cordite or antiseptic, just dust on warm wind, like the earth had exhaled. Sarah stood on the runway as the transport's engines wound down, boots planted on familiar soil, and felt nothing. Not relief. Not pride. Just an echoing silence where her pulse should have been. She had been gone almost a year. And in that year, she had built something that no longer belonged to her. The compound looked unchanged. Sun-baked concrete, faded murals, the sharp clang of distant weights from the gym. But it felt like walking through a photograph of her old life. She passed the trauma bay, where she'd once stitched wounds with shaking hands. Past the firing range, where Thompson had first taught her how to breathe like a sniper. Every place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by old versions of herself. Her office was larger now, glass walls and a brass nameplate that didn't feel real. Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, Director, Advanced Combat Medical Support Program. It felt like wearing someone else's skin. She dropped her bag, sat at the desk, and stared at the stack of folders waiting. Applications, evaluations, curriculum proposals, all stamped with her name like a signature on someone else's destiny. The first knock came before she'd even opened the top file. "Come," she said automatically. The door opened. Lisa Chen stepped in, no longer the tentative pediatric nurse turned reluctant shooter. Now her posture was taut, her eyes sharp as frost. "Reporting for assignment, ma'am," she said. Sarah almost laughed. She hated being called ma'am. "You're not reporting," Sarah said. "You're inheriting." Chen blinked. "You're going to help me build the next generation of instructors," Sarah said. "You're proof this works. They'll follow you." Chen hesitated. "Are you sure I'm ready?" Sarah studied her, the straight spine, the scar along her jaw, the quiet steadiness in her hands. "No," Sarah said honestly, "but neither was I." They started with 12 instructor candidates, hand-picked from the first 3 graduating classes. Some were medics who had become marksmen. Some were marksmen who had learned to heal. All of them bore the quiet, haunted calm she knew too well. She watched them on the range, rifles rising and falling in perfect rhythm with their breath. Watched them in the trauma bay, hands slick with synthetic blood, eyes sharp and unblinking. They were better than she had ever been. And it terrified her, because she could see the cracks already. The sleepless eyes, the hands that trembled after they stopped moving, the laughter that died too quickly. Sarah recognized all of it. They were breaking the way she had broken. She pulled them into counseling sessions, forced downtime, mandatory decompression days. Command protested, she ignored them. Burnt-out instructors create broken students, she said flatly. They stopped arguing. Thompson returned from Europe 2 weeks later, looking older. His hair was almost white now, though his hands were still steady as bedrock. He walked into her office without knocking, dropped a box of cigars on her desk and said, "They're calling you a revolutionary." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I don't feel like one." "Good," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Revolutionaries who think they're revolutionaries usually get people killed." They spent long nights reviewing footage of training exercises, building out new lesson plans, arguing over doctrine. Thompson pushed for more psychological screening. Sarah pushed for more medical hours. Chen pushed them both, refusing to let either side dominate. Slowly, the skeleton of something sustainable began to take shape. Not just a program, a lineage. And yet Sarah felt herself thinning, like a shadow stretched too far. She worked from dawn until the small hours, eyes burning from screen light, coffee cooling untouched beside her. Her hands, once so sure, sometimes hovered over documents as if she had forgotten how to write her own name. She stopped going to the chapel, stopped sleeping, stopped dreaming, except when she didn't want to, and the tower came back and the man fell again, over and over in perfect silence. One night after the instructors had gone to bed, Sarah walked out to the empty range. Moonlight silvered the targets, the sand the steel. She set up her old rifle with the reverence of someone unsealing a time capsule. She lay prone, cheek to stock, breath slowing. Through the scope, the world shrank to a single black dot. In, out, pause. She fired. The shot was perfect. It always was. And it made her feel nothing. That, more than anything, frightened her. The next morning, Chen found her in the armory, cleaning the rifle with mechanical precision. "Ma'am," Chen said gently, "when's the last time you took a day off?" Sarah didn't look up. "Can't remember." "You should," Chen said. "Why?" "Because if you break," Chen said, "so does everything you built." Sarah froze. Because she knew Chen was right. That afternoon, Sarah forced herself into the base clinic. She hadn't set foot in it in over a year. It smelled of iodine and gauze and something softer, life. She took a shift, stitching minor lacerations, treating infections, handing out antibiotics. Her hands remembered without thinking. So did her voice, soft and steady. A corporal with a sprained ankle thanked her like she'd saved his world. And for the first time in months, something warm stirred in her chest. The healer wasn't gone, just buried. That night she walked to the chapel. It was empty. She sat in the last pew, hands clasped like they might float away if she let go. She whispered into the quiet, "I don't know who I am anymore." And though no one answered, the silence felt less sharp this time. In the weeks that followed, she began building rituals to keep herself whole. Morning laps around the compound. Journaling every night before sleep. One full day a week in the clinic, no rifles allowed. And slowly, she began to feel the pulse of her own life again. Not just the echo of what she had done. The instructors graduated 3 months later. They stood on the same parade ground where she had once stood as a student herself, boots planted, eyes bright and solemn. When they saluted her, she returned it, but she didn't smile. Because this wasn't an ending. It was multiplication. There would be hundreds of them soon. Maybe thousands. And her name would be etched into all of them, whether she liked it or not. After the ceremony, Thompson found her standing alone by the empty bleachers. "Does it feel like success yet?" he asked. Sarah shook her head slowly. "It feels like weight." "Yeah," he said quietly, "it always will." That night she lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. She had built something that might outlive her. She didn't know if that was triumph or tragedy. Maybe it was both. The dawn was soft the morning she decided to leave. Not retire, not quit, just step aside. She watched the light crawl across the parade ground from her office window, long shadows stretching over the dirt where she had once stood trembling with a rifle in her hands, where the tower had never quite stopped looming in her mind. The base was waking up around her, engines turning over, boots thudding on concrete, whistles, voices. Life moving on. Without her. Or maybe because of her. She couldn't tell which anymore. The program no longer needed her to run. It ran on its own now, like a living thing. 5 training detachments across 3 continents. Dozens of instructors. Hundreds of graduates embedded, with special operations teams worldwide. Somewhere right now, a medic she had never met was holding a dying man together with one hand and keeping the enemy at bay with the other. Somewhere, one of her students was taking a shot they would never forget. Somewhere, someone was becoming her without knowing her name. That was the point. And the problem. Chen came to see her that morning, boots crisp on the tile, eyes steady and unreadable. She stood at parade rest in front of the desk like Sarah had once stood before Harrison's. "I heard," Chen said simply. Sarah nodded. "It's yours now." Chen hesitated. "You sure you want to let go?" Sarah studied her, the way her shoulders no longer hunched under invisible weight, the way her voice no longer wavered. She saw steel wrapped in mercy. Exactly what she had hoped to create. "I don't want to," Sarah said honestly, "but wanting doesn't matter." They walked the compound together one last time. Past the firing range, where the air smelled of cordite and winter sunlight. Past the trauma bay, where the lights glared on stainless steel like captured lightning. Past the chapel, its door cracked open like a quiet heartbeat. Everywhere they went, trainees saluted. Sarah returned each one with a nod, her throat tight. She had once walked these same paths invisible. Now she was legend. And she had never felt more human or more tired. That afternoon, she gave her final lecture. The auditorium was packed, standing room only. Instructors, candidates, medics flown in from half a dozen countries just to hear her speak. She didn't use the podium. She just stood at the front, hands loose at her sides. "You've heard all the doctrine," she said quietly. "You've learned the breathing and the angles and the anatomy. You've practiced until your hands stopped shaking, or until you convinced yourselves they had." A ripple of dry laughter moved through the room. Sarah's voice stayed soft. "But here's what matters. It's not the shot. It's not the suture. It's the choice. Every time, and it never gets easier, and it's never supposed to." Silence settled, heavy and sharp. "You are not here to be heroes," she said. "You are here to be shields. Sometimes that means standing between death and the people you love. Sometimes it means becoming death for one terrible second so they can keep breathing. Either way, you carry them. That's the job." She let her gaze sweep the room. "Don't let the world turn you into weapons," she said. "Be guardians. Be healers who know how to fight. and never forget which part comes first. They gave her a standing ovation. She didn't smile. She just walked off stage and didn't look back. Her quarters were already packed when she returned. Just a single duffel bag, her field kit, and a small wooden box. Inside the box, a scalpel, a single spent rifle casing, a folded note from Rodriguez that still smelled faintly of engine oil. "My daughter walks now. Thank you." And the photo they had taken the day they'd pulled Kim and Santos out of that village alive. All of them grinning with exhaustion, dust in their hair, blood on their sleeves, alive. She closed the lid gently. The sun was low when she walked out to the tarmac. Thompson was waiting. He looked older than she remembered. Maybe they both did. "Leaving before they build a statue of you?" he asked. She snorted. "If they do, make sure it doesn't smile." He nodded, his expression unreadable. Then, after a beat, "You did good, Doc." The old name cracked something open in her chest. "I just didn't want them to die," she said softly. "Neither did I," Thompson said. They stood in silence until the transport's engines roared awake. Then Thompson saluted her, slow, precise. She returned it and climbed aboard. She didn't look back as the base shrank behind her. Months later, she lived by the ocean. A small house, salt wind, the hiss of waves instead of rotor wash. No radios, no briefings. She still woke early out of habit. She still jogged the beach at dawn, breath rising in the chill, her body unwilling to forget the rhythm of war. Sometimes she volunteered at the local clinic. Stitches, vaccines, flu shots. No gunfire, no screaming. Just life. One morning she walked down to the pier before sunrise. The world was gray and still, the sea black glass under a fatting moon. She leaned on the railing, watching the horizon bloom with pale fire. Somewhere thousands of miles away, her students were starting their day. Somewhere, someone was loading a rifle. Somewhere, someone was tying off a tourniquet. And somewhere, someone was breathing slow and steady, choosing to become her for one heartbeat so someone else could go on breathing forever. She let the thought wash over her like the tide. Not pride. Not regret. Just acceptance. The wind lifted her hair. She whispered to the waves, though no one could hear her. "I was a healer, I still am." The words felt true. Maybe for the first time. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.